Right, we have Convergence's Speedo Force 2 of 2, starring the Flask, the Willie West version, and he is fighting Wonder Woman on the cover. This is part of the Convergence's event, a battle royale with various different factions of DC continuity. That is a really good summary of it. I should make note of that for future videos. A battle royale with various different factions of DC continuity. In this one we have the Flask, the former Flask, Willie West, who had been erased from continuity. This was his triumphant return. More on his eventual full-on return later in the vid. But he is joined by his son and his daughter and the speedster member of the zoo crew. They are being faced with an invading force of fairyland led by Wonder Woman. This Wonder Woman comes from Flask Point, the abysmal John Jeffries farce, an utterly unlikable piece of shit story. In that, the immature edgelord writer made Wonder Woman into a warmongering villain. Just like how he writes the actual Wonder Woman too. So we have the Flask versus Wonder Woman, just like on the cover. You might have noticed the interior art is by Wally Grummett. And it is a good fight sequence. It is most of the issue, the fight between the Flask and Wonder Woman. And as they fight, Fastback from the zoo crew takes the kids away from the battle zone to protect them, and then starts thinking about how he can help the Flask out from a distance. As I said, the biggest part of this issue is an action piece. And I think to better understand or appreciate it, you have to realise that this character, the Willie West version of the Flask, had been maliciously removed from canon by John Jeffries to reassert his nostalgia. Barney Allen had to be the main and the only version of the Flask. Bringing Barney Allen back wasn't enough though. We had to remove Willie West from ever existing with a line-wide hard reboot. Barney Allen had to be the Flask and the only Flask, so decrees fuckwit losers John Jeffries and Dan Diddy Dido. I know I talked about it in the first part, but there is an example of that, and part of the reason why they carried it out so manipulatively was because they knew that the Flask was going to become a bankable IP. They knew they were eventually going to make a Flask movie or a Flask TV show, and they wanted to clear the decks of Willie West. So then producers are presented with Barney Allen, and Barney Allen is the Flask in all these pieces of media instead of Willie West. This further bolsters John Jeffries' agenda by creating in the general public the knowledge that the Flask is Barney Allen. Look at before he restored Barney Allen. Willie West had been the Flask in the cartoons. They were planning a Flask movie with Willie West. He never got off the ground. I think Willie West was going to be the Flask in the cancelled Justice League movie, the George Miller one. Willie West was the Flask, and John Jeffries carried out a very petty and vindictive sabotage of the Flask to match his own out-of-date memories from the Silver Age. This is a good comic though. There's just not that much to say about a fight. The kids, they save fast back from some fairyland warriors. The kids, they have powers themselves. This came from a run right before Willie West was taken off the playing board. Martin Quaid. What is it with the Flask always attracting shitheads? I'm sure I mentioned every single thing I have brought up in this one in the first part, but stay tuned because we are going places. And then there is this bit, which is great. She ties him up in a lasso of truth. And then he tells her how she is the worst version of Wonder Woman and how she could never know actual love. His kids then pop in. There is a thing where they are tethered to the Flask by the Speedo Force, and Willie uses the temporary distraction of their arrival to take down Wonder Woman. And we have a nice heroic shot of the Flask, the guy who hadn't appeared in a comic for 5 solid years before this due to cockheads. The Willie West version of the Flask would eventually return. He was brought back during DC Rebirth. DC Rebirth was like an unreboot. It was unrebooting the new 52 reboot. He returned in that, and he was a member of the Tiny Titans, but he was still being relegated to not being the main Flask. Barney Allen had to be the main Flask, because now there was a TV show starring Barney Allen, and a movie in development starring Barney Allen. And there were people who thought Barney Allen was the only Flask. Just like John Jeffries and Dan Diddy Dido planned. Then, in Dan Diddy Dido's final days, he let the warmongering villain, Tom Queen, fucking eviscerate Willie West forever by making him a mass murderer who is aware enough to cover it up. Tom Queen. That is what this video is becoming about. Other writers worked overtime to try and fix that, but comics have never been able to escape Tom Queen. He is a legitimate problem. He writes the most destructive pieces of comic book fiction from a place of pure twattishness. If you don't know, he used to work for the CIA and was actually involved with the US military's common implementation of waterboarding in the 2000s. I'm not making that up. He fucking brags about it and laughs about all the brown people he has tortured. I understand his comics now, though. I know why they are what they are. Someone once told me that, supposedly, someone from the CIA has to look over all his scripts to make sure he's not leaking classified information. I think that is bullshit. I don't think they do. But he thinks it's true. And so all his scripts are trying to psychologically guilt that proofreader for their involvement in the government. All his stories are about war crimes. They're about PTSD. They're all dog shit and evil and pathetic. They all want to be smart and are not. But I came to realise they aren't written for me. They aren't written for us. They're not written for fans or even a group of people who like them. They are all, each and every single one, written to make a likely non-existent CIA proofreader suicidal. That is Tom Queen, a gaslighting, pretentious hack who won't take accountability or responsibility for his own past war crimes, but wants everyone else to feel they are to blame for it. Bit of a rant about Tom Queen there. Completely unrelated to this really, but I refuse to read his comics, so we don't get to hear about him much. He really is the S-tier shithead. He's the worst of the worst. I think he could be, the worst. Not just his writing. He is a verified bad person. Not even from the things he has done. He could be redemptive. He could feel bad about it, but he doesn't. He wants everyone else to feel bad because he doesn't. Convergence's Speedo Force is great though. Excellent little mini-series. Another great Convergence's mini. If you want a two-part story with the Flask fighting evil Wonder Woman, there you go. I'll give this 7 thumbs up.